All right, and welcome back, everyone, to our final segment, but one of our favorites. But before we bring them in, I just want to remind everybody that you're at the at-home home show. It's the virtual home show because, well, folks, we don't know where else to go. So these contractors have gotten together below to offer you services at the convenience of your home. And so if you've been watching all day, thank you so much. And I am so excited to actually bring in August from Hoppe Tree Service. August, are you there?
I'm right here, Jonathan. Good to see you.
Oh, we've got some crackly audio. Did you hear that? Are you still there?
I am. Can you hear me now?
I think so. I think we're going to give it a shot here, but I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully I'll give you all the bandwidth you need, and I'll check back with you in a little bit.
Well, sounds good, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Okay, well, I hope the audio is really good now. It's hard for me to tell, but my name is August Hoppe with Hoppe Tree Service. We're a sponsor of this home show, and I think it's kind of cool that we are the last seminar. So we're gonna talk about trees today. It's spring, so everybody's been at home, or most people have been staying at their homes and looking out at their trees. So there's been a lot of questions. This spring has been busy for us. We've had a lot of people asking questions about their trees, when to prune them, how to prune them, services that we can provide. So that's been a good thing for us in that regard. But today, I'm going to talk about myself a little bit. I'm the president of our company, certified arborist. We have 18 certified arborists on staff. I co-own the business with my brother, Fred. He's a certified arborist, and he's also a hazard tree risk assessor too. So we have experts. If you are concerned that your tree is sick or a liability or a hazard, my brother Fred would be a very good person to talk to too. So you can go on our website. It's hoppetreeservice.com. That's a very good place to communicate with us, or you can call our office, but all those things are good. So our company has been around for almost 50 years now, started by my father and grandfather and uncle. And now my brother and I own the business. So we're managing it day to day. We have teams of arborists that go out in the field. They prune trees. We do tree removal. We have a plant healthcare department, so we do take care of sick trees as well. And so that's kind of what we do. So we have a lot of experience pruning. I have a slideshow. I'm going to share the screen here. So today, our big talk is going to be about ornamental pruning and tree care. So it's important that you prune trees properly. Trees last a long time in our landscapes. Trees can live to be 100, 150 years old. So if you don't prune them correctly, you can severely damage them. It's not like a lawn. If you were to burn out a lawn with a herbicide treatment, you can replace a lawn in a season, but not with a tree. So mature trees do need care. They do need professionals. That's one thing we like to stress. So these improper pruning practices can really damage trees. So if you can see this picture up on the top, that's a tear. A cut was made, and as the branch was falling down, it ripped into the tissue of the trunk there, and that is going to take that tree a much longer time to heal over. So when you're making pruning cuts, you want to make smaller cuts. Smaller cuts are going to be better than larger cuts and clean cuts. So you want to reduce the amount of surface area, because every cut that you make on a tree is technically a wound, and you want to try to allow that tree to grow over those wounds as best as possible. So electric company needs to make aggressive cuts. You can see this U cut that was made in this tree here. That is not the best thing for a tree, but we do need reliable power. So we do cut the electric company some slack when they're doing their pruning, because they have, their mandate first and foremost is electric service. So that's something to be noted. Our bottom picture here is basically some stubbing cuts or topping cuts. When you make large cuts like that, what happens is you get sprouting branches that occur from cuts like that. So it's always best to cut back to another branch on the tree, not to just leave a stub. If you do that, like I said, you get the excessive sprouting, you get decay in there, and it is something that those are fast growing branches. They're not well attached to the tree. So if we have storms or wind, there's a very good likelihood branches like that could fall off or break from the tree. Flush cuts. You do not want to make flush cuts. So when you cut the large limb back to the stem, there is something called a branch collar. You want to leave the branch collar intact. If you cut straight into the trunk, you're opening up more surface area. Cuts like this will not grow over, and they can cause decay in the tree years later. So we have many cases where we go back to a tree 10, 15 years later, and there's a big hollow cavity in the tree. And the reason for that is from these old pruning cuts. So when people ask us to raise up their tree or clear their house, we're going to try to make numerous smaller cuts rather than a few large cuts. So that's a good rule of thumb to think about. If you can accomplish the task with 3 or 4 smaller cuts, try to do that rather than large cuts back to the trunk of the tree. Trees don't like that sort of shock. Storm damage is a big thing, especially, we've just had a few storms the last couple weeks here, and we've gotten a lot of calls for storm damage. The trees that fail in storms are typically trees that have not been pruned properly or not been pruned at all. So in our landscape, when we plant trees, they grow differently than in nature. In the landscape, we have lots of sun that comes down typically, and the trees are given space to grow, and so they develop side branches. In a forest setting, trees grow tall and skinny as they race to the sky and compete with each other. So they're very tall, skinny trees. In our landscapes, we have wider trees. We have side branches that are growing longer and competing with the main stem of the tree. And you create these codominant junctions where 2 limbs come together. And that is where we see that's where we see trees split. That's a vulnerable place in a tree, and that's where high winds can break a tree. So when we prune trees, we try to create one single strong central leader to them, and not have codominant limbs, not have 3 or 4 main stems to the tree. So we create better structure by proper pruning, and we're going to go into that a little bit here. I'll show you some examples of that as we go. So here's a good example. On my left side here is a stub. Pruning cut was made, but 2 or 3 inches of the branch was left. That's not the greatest pruning cut. What happens is you get dieback from that spot, or you can get sprouting occur. So you'll have more sprouts, water sprouts, or sucker branches that come out when you leave a stub cut. On the right, this one here is the branch collar has been removed. So when that was cut too close to the trunk, you can see the surface area that's been created with that, and that's a bad cut. So the ideal cut is right in the middle here. That's called a target cut to the branch collar. So you've left the branch collar. There's that protrusion off of the trunk where the branch and the stem meet. That's called the branch collar. You want to maintain that. That's a very important concept. If you get one concept out of today's talk, it is do not remove the branch collar when you're pruning. So leave those branch collars on. Okay, trees can show us over time how well a pruning cut was. This picture on my left here is an old pruning cut that was completely sealed over. You can see it was done evenly. There's no openness to that. There's no decay in there. That's a honey locust branch. That's a tree that is very good at compartmentalizing wounds, and that was a well-placed cut by a homeowner or an arborist years ago. Now, this other picture, on the other hand, you can see is not as good of a cut. There's decay in this location. This top left area was flushed to the stem, and that's why this good growth, this good callus growth, was not able to develop. So this tree, this is a cherry tree, and cherry trees are not very good compartmentalizers, so that's part of the problem as well. But you can see this growth is growing over the injury, sealing that off, but it's never going to make it all the way across because of this flushed area on the top left side. And so you've got this U shape here. So you can tell that was not a good pruning cut. It's going to lead to most likely the death of this tree. So that's why proper cuts are important, very important. Okay, with shrubs. So a lot of people ask about shrub pruning, ask if we do it, or they want advice on pruning shrubs. So we like to talk about that. A good rule of thumb is where you make your pruning cuts is where you see new growth come. So ideally, we like to make thinning cuts and reduction cuts. So what the heck are those? So a thinning cut is going to be a cut that's made back to the parent stem. Some of these larger low branches are actually cut right down to the main base of the plant. What happens when you do that is that allows for new growth, regrowth to come up. And it constantly rejuvenates the plant when you do that. So if we have a multi-stem plant, a bush like a lilac, we like to thin it out. You open up that canopy. within the tree. More sunlight can get it down into the tree. You get better blossoms, and you've opened up better airflow. You remove these branches that are rubbing and crisscrossing on each other. So you might take 10 to 20% of the older stems out when you do that. Thins it out, gives more space, looks nicer, and it's much healthier for the plant. A lot of people like to control the size of their plants too. We call those reduction cuts when we cut the ends of the branches back. So what you want to try to do is cut back to a parent stem. If you look up here, you can see this cut was made, and it was cut back to this lateral branch. And ideally, the lateral branch would be at least 1/3 of the size of the branch that you cut off. So you can drastically reduce the size of a shrub, thinning it out, reducing the height of it, and still have it look very natural. If what we see in the landscapes very often is people rounding over their shrubs with their hedge trimmers, making all their cuts on the ends of the branches. And when you do that, all your growth is at the end. So it just kind of turns into this big ball, this big ball of growth. Every year you round it off, and then what happens is it hollows out in the inside. No light gets into the center, no cuts were made in the center, no new growth happens in the center. And then with some bushes, they'll just keep growing higher and higher, and you won't be able to see the flowers. We have a lot of people with lilac bushes, old lilacs, where they ask, why does this not flower anymore? Or why does it only have 2 flowers at the very top of it? It's because it hasn't been pruned right, probably for the last 30 years. And it's very difficult to correct things like that because, we like I said, we like to make those thinning cuts. We like to remove some of the older stems to create new growth. But if you have an old lilac that only has 2 or 3 stems, you don't have a lot of options, and usually you just ruin the shape of it then. So sometimes we have to do some hybrid things and try to make some cuts in the middle. If it's a 15-foot tall lilac, maybe we're making cuts at 7 feet off the ground. We do whatever we can to rejuvenate it and make those pruning cuts throughout the plant so that we get that new growth in a variety of different places. So where you cut is where that new growth happens. Okay, the example I talked about earlier was codominant stems. This is a good picture of a tree with a codominant stem, this picture on the left here. So when this tree is young, it is best to remove one of those stems or cut back the end of one of those stems so that it slows its growth and so the other stem can become the dominant stem of the tree. A strong central leader is going to hold up much better against wind, snow, and ice and things like that. So this picture on the right here is a storm damage, high wind situation. The tree had 2 trunks that were growing together, and at that location is where it split. That's a vulnerable place in the tree. What happens over time is that those 2 stems start growing together, and it's not solid wood. It's called included bark because they're 2 independent stems that start fusing together, and it's not a strong attachment. That's why we have the splitting happening in storms. So we're going to cover a few, with my remaining time, we're going to try to cover a few of the types of pruning that we do to alleviate this situation. Okay, so this is probably my favorite picture of the whole slideshow here. So training young trees. It's easy to do, and it's so important. If you prune trees when they're young, you develop the strong structure they need, and it will carry them through their lives. And we're talking about 150-year-old, 200-year-old trees. So this tree had 3 main stems on it. The side branches were even taller than the center part of the tree. What would happen is as that tree would grow, those branches would they'd be vulnerable, they'd be weak at their junction point, and a storm would come and it would split this tree in half, ruining the tree. So what you can do is you can cut off some of these side branches, encouraging the strong central leader to grow on the tree. A good concept to think about with trees is they're like a water balloon. If you push on the sides, it will make the top grow up. So you push the tree, cutting the side branches, it will force more growth up. If you cut the top, push the top down, it expands on the sides. That happens with fruit trees. Orchard pruning is where an example where maybe you would cut the top down and do that and force that growth on the side. So you want to develop scaffold branching on trees. You want to look at where are the permanent branches going to be. Ideally, you're going to have them alternate along the length of the trunk. So this one right here on the left is the scaffold branch, on the right another scaffold branch, on the left again, they alternate. They're well spaced. You remove branches that are going to be rubbing or interfering with your scaffold branches. So the scaffold branches are the backbone of the tree, those good permanent branches. It's those other branches, those water sprouts or rubbing branches that start growing around a scaffold branch. Those are the branches you remove. It creates better airflow through the tree, more sunlight gets in there. The branches that are left are vibrant and strong, and that's how you prune a tree. Here's another few good examples. Younger trees can tolerate a lot of pruning. Even up to 30–40% of the canopy can remove when pruning a young, vigorous tree. So sometimes you can do light pruning, where with those codominant competing leads, you cut portions of them off, and that will slow their growth along the center leader. Or with a more moderate or heavier pruning, you actually eliminate those competing leaders altogether. So it depends on how soon you're going to be able to come back to prune. As professional arborists, we love to be at people's house every year pruning their trees and maintaining it, but sometimes that's not realistic. We know it might be 3 years before we come back. So we might prune a little heavier to get it right the first time. But if it's a client that we're maintaining the property on an annual basis, we'll probably go a little lighter on it so that we don't have to be as severe with it. It's also very species specific too. Our maple trees grow very fast. They can tolerate heavier pruning. Some of our other trees, like maybe a magnolia tree or a birch tree, they're not very good with heavy pruning. So you need to understand your species, and that's where being a professional and hiring a professional come in and help you and do a consult around your property could be a very good thing for you. Here's another one of my favorite pictures here too. So this was a maple tree that you can see so many competing leaders in the tree. And what you do is you thin that out, you create better spacing between the limbs, and this tree is a much stronger tree. It was actually a tree that had been topped at one point, and that was what has caused all those sprouts to occur. So this is basically a restoration pruning, bringing this tree back into health. So that's what's happening there. Here's another really good picture. Here we have multiple stems growing. You can see when the cuts were made, we've created more space, more room for those limbs to grow and be healthier. And that's the thing you want to do. That's a message we want to hit home today with that. So you don't want to over thin. Here's our tree. It needs lots of pruning. You can see rubbing and crisscrossing branches all over it. Let's look at this next picture here. You do not want to do this. This is called lion tailing. This is where you take your shrub or your tree. It could be a big tree or it could be a small tree. The principles are still the same. If you just hollow out all the growth in the center, it pushes all the growth on the outside, and these branches actually start sagging. And I've seen trees that were pruned this way, and then the next year I've come back and they're droopy. Those limbs are droopy and more prone to breakage and storms. This is how you want to do it. You want to make your cuts throughout the canopy, staggered along the limb, evenly and thoroughly through the full canopy of the tree. Here's another good example of shrub pruning. We've thinned out this shrub. We've taken some of those older stems down to the ground. That's going to allow more space for the other stems. We've cut back the height by reducing it, and we've cut it back to other branches so that it has a natural look. You get less sprouting, and the tree doesn't just sprout right back, and that's good. So I think I'll stop sharing now and try to go back to my main screen here. So those are our basic examples of pruning. There's a lot more involved with pruning than what I was able to cover in 15 minutes here. A lot of people also have questions about flowering trees, when to prune plants or shrubs that are flowering, and the best answer with that is after they're done flowering. So like lilacs, now would be a good time to do that. That way you're not cutting off flower buds and you're encouraging more flowering on your tree. Pruning can also be helpful for preventing insects and diseases. So we have a lot of wet weather nowadays. In the springs we've had, the last few years, we've had very wet weather, and wet springs can cause more fungal disease. So we see a lot of our maple trees, crabapple trees, spruce trees that have been showing fungal disease. Mainly that happens because of the wetness of the spring. And if you can create a drier area or an area with more sunlight and airflow through it, you can reduce the amount of fungus disease. So we thin out the trees, get that sunlight in there, they dry out faster, makes them healthier. Uh-oh, Jonathan's back. That means I must be running low on time.
That's right. August, what an amazing presentation. I mean, I think I learned more in that 15 minutes than I think people have talked to me for years. You could truly are an artist. Thank you for sharing that today. I just probably again realized that maybe pruning is not something I should do. I should probably just have you guys out there to take care of it.
Jonathan, we're only a phone call away.
And what is that phone call? What is that phone number?
414-257-2111.
That's right, folks. All right. Well, thanks, August. We'll see you next time. I always appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Take care.